You know, by the way, everyone here has to take a bow, and I got to say thank you, because I just get to deliver these polls, and, you know, I take polls, but the people make the polls right. And I was telling President Trump he could win the popular vote, and he would not have won the popular vote nationally without the improvement that he made in New York. So, and the New York State Conservative Party, Jerry, how many votes? Was it?
321,788 votes.
Just somebody who pays attention. So the improvement in New York State and the Conservative Party helping, you know, our Republican friends do that for President Trump enabled us to win the national popular vote. And there were a lot of people that said, oh, you know, you got to win the swing states, you know, which we did, which President Trump did. And by the way, President Trump, you know, I just happened to be the pollster. One good story, I spoke to him after the Madison Square Garden rally. I spoke to him 8 days out from the election. And he's asking me, how are we going to do? And I said, and this is good for Andrew Giuliani, I said, just make your putts. I'm like, we're ahead. We're leading in the 7 battleground states. We're ahead in the national popular vote. We've been ahead in the national popular vote since when we won the primaries, since before that, since Biden surrendered Afghanistan. Just make your putts, and we'll win this. And I said, you got to remember, it was 8 days out. And I said to him, I said, you know, at this point in time, Mitt Romney was up by a point in the national polls. And then when Hurricane Sandy hit, he forgot to come to New York and New Jersey to empathize with people who were hurting. And you've done that. You've gone to, from the start of the Camp East Palestine, you've been in North Carolina, you've been there with people. And I said, when Mitt Romney didn't do that, Obama came in, hugged Chris Christie, and on Sunday night, Mitt Romney was losing by a point. Monday night, Obama was still up by a point, and Obama won. In 8 days, he turned it from a 1-point deficit to a 4-point national win. So President Trump listened to all that, and he only had one comment. He says, I'm not Mitt Romney. And that's the guy. This pollster, that's the guy this pollster has been fortunate enough to work for since 2011, when he thought about running, and he decided not to. But we're going to go through some poll numbers. But the great thing is, unless, I mean, people would say to me, why is he going to Nassau County for the rally? I would say, well, that was the day he was supposed to be sentenced, and he could have gone to Rikers Island, but it was like he was going to be in New York anyway, so it was a great thing to have a rally. But we could speak to all suburban voters that day from Nassau County. And in the campaign, it had been going on for months, because ever since he did like the Jersey Shore rally and he was going to do the Nassau rally, he's like, do you think we should do the Garden? And the people in the campaign knew what it was going to cost, and of course, but he did Madison Square Garden, and it was a national message. And from New York, he was sending a message to the whole country that we could get our country back. And you actually helped him do that, and you helped him win the national popular vote, which was really, really important for the whole country. But let's go through some of these slides, because what I want you to think about is we have to defy history and win the midterm elections. The last time we did that in 2002, we picked up 8 House seats and 2 Senate seats. But that was Bush after 9/11, and it was New York that led the way on that effort. And you're going to see numbers here from our polling, which will show that New York can lead that effort again, because, you know, I look at the last election, I'm like, okay, so Trump did better in New York, where we got 3.6 million votes. 2 years ago, there was only 5 million votes for governor. Not even, right, Jerry? Not even 5 million votes. This time it was 8.2 million. It's a turnout war between now and 2026. And there's no reason we can't get rid of this lousy governor. She's the worst governor, just like we got rid of Joe Biden. She is the worst governor in the history of in the history of New York, and we got rid of the worst president in the history of the United States, and we're finding that out every day, how bad Joe Biden was. But also, when you think about it, like in New York 3, I mean, Mike LaPetri didn't get any help from the national Republicans, but he ran a close race, and Trump won that district by 5 points. Trump only lost New York 4-1, only lost New York 18-3, only lost New York 19-1. There are millions of Trump voters in this state who came out for Donald Trump, even though he wasn't going to win the state. They will come out for members of Congress and members of the state Senate, members of the Assembly. They will come out because he's going to need their votes in the midterm, so we don't go back to having a Nancy Pelosi-run Congress that decides, well, we can impeach our enemies, et cetera. So we can't lose the midterms. And New York State's going to be at the center of that. But let's look at, we might as well gloat at some numbers. We might as well look at how good the last election was. So when you go to the first slide, Trump won the national popular vote 50-48. And what's interesting about that, he was never really losing. We had him up to the day before he beat Joe Biden in the debate. First week Harris got in, we had him up to in the national popular vote. September, we had him up to. So he held that lead going through to September. Next slide. What's interesting, and by the way, all these slides are on our website. They're all published on McLaughlinonline.com if you want to see them. Plus, Jerry has a copy of it he could share with you. Of the people, of 1,000 people that we did in a post-election survey, of the people that voted for President Trump, 51% of the answers were related to issues. Only 48% related to character. But the reason why they were voting for Trump, the economy, the border, fixing the mess, good job record, they were saving the country, but it was an issue-related message. Next slide. Which means that when you ask people if they were voting for Trump, why'd you vote for him? It was a positive vote, 87-13. And we'll go to the next slide. Harris, she had no message. The Democrats are in disarray. The Democrats, and by the way, for us New Yorkers, the foundation, the fault line in the Democrat Party is the Democrat Socialists of America. They operate out of New York. They are taking their party down a path of destruction where they have no reason to hold public office, no reason to be in office at all. And the reasons that people stuck with Harris were just negative attacks on Trump. Not for Trump. It was 55% character related, and it was anti-Trump. It was for folks like me, protecting democracy. I mean, come on, their way of protecting democracy is throwing RFK and Republicans off the ballot. Next slide. 27% of her vote was just simply a vote against Trump. So she had less of a positive than Trump. Next slide. This is the direction of the United States. By the way, the last time it was in a positive direction was coming out of COVID. And in December, you had 66% of all voters saying we're on the wrong track. It's dropping to 48, and 32% now are saying it's headed in the right direction. That last survey was done only after a week, after Trump's been in office for a week, but it's starting to move in the right direction. So it was a 16-point improvement since December. But Joe Biden, the damage that he did was unbelievable. Next slide. The economy, the recession. 39% of voters think we're in recession. Look at that line after, when Trump left office, and before he left office, he had the country, everybody was saying we're not in a recession, the economy's grown, he had economic growth, and then we had to shut down the country because of COVID. And now it's starting to come back where for the first time since COVID, only 39% of all voters think we're in recession. So he's given us optimism. Next slide. They say the economy's getting better, 39%, only 49% say worse. That's a huge improvement compared to what Biden, look at that spike. That was all the inflation he was creating back in 21 and 22. Next slide. And you can see here, this is when we ask people about the impact on inflation. 84% of all voters in the country tell us that the inflation's had a negative impact on them. By the way, at the end of the campaign, people were saying they were undecided. I was like, sure, just go to the supermarket and buy gas, and then let me know how you're going to vote. But 84% negatively impacted by inflation, 50% to the point where they can't afford basic necessities. This is a big challenge because if President Trump's going to succeed, we have to rein in inflation. We have to go back to a more affordable living. Next slide. You talk about the Democrat Party, the bottom falling out. That 40%, that's the generic vote for Congress right now in the country. And we've been pretty accurate. We had the midterms Republicans won the popular vote. Republicans are now 48% in the generic vote, and we had it tied on election day. It was 48-48. But the Democrats are really, I mean, can you believe they're still voting against deporting criminal illegal aliens? They voted against the Lake and Riley Act. I mean, right, these are, well, we just got to keep pointing out that they're wrong. Next slide. And this is Donald Trump's job approval. Now, on election day, when we asked the voters, was the media more favorable to Donald Trump or biased against Donald Trump, or more favorable to Harris and was biased against Harris? 54-26, they told us the media was biased against Trump. That's what he's had to put up with on his job approval over these years. On election day, he was at 56 in spite of the media bias, in spite of that 54-26 being biased against him. And when you look at today, he's still 52-43. So the president that we're getting right now is the best we've seen since before COVID, the best job ratings for him. Next slide. Also, if you ask, do you approve of Trump and his policies, that's 42%. They like his personality, they like his policies. There's another 14% that likes his policies, but they don't like his style so much. That's 57% approve. Only 38% disapprove his policies. We stick to his agenda. We give him, by the way, you're members of Congress, and you're gonna love some of the next couple slides. If they wanna oppose Donald Trump, we need to have those issue fights with them. We need to not back up. We need to make sure we get these policies passed. Next slide. Notice the 56 is unfavorable to Joe Biden. That matches the ones that support us. President Trump, at one point, Susie Wiles had me go down. It was after the midterms elections. She had me, two good stories. First, in February of 21, after he'd left office, I had to go meet with him with Jason Miller, and we were meeting in his office going over some poll numbers and Battle Straight poll numbers. And I said to him, I said, do you realize, and President Trump's sitting in his office and he's watching the impeachment hearings. And it was his office in Mar-a-Lago. He's watching the impeachment hearings, and I'm sure he was pretty upset about what he was watching. But I said to him, I just got a poll back, and in the battleground states, 63% of all Republicans want you to run again. And this reminds me of when Reagan, by the way, Jason was talking about when I started with the Conservative Party. Started with the Conservative Party in 1976 as a volunteer in Rockland County when I was in college. Nikki Longo and the other group, because we were for Reagan. And I used to get phone calls like, oh, there's going to be a college Republican meeting in Albany, you can't come. And I'm like, who said so? And he's like, oh, the state chairman. I'm like, Richard Rosenbaum knows me. He says, now that you started volunteering for Reagan, we know who you are. It's like, so anyway, but I saw the numbers. When I used to work for Arthur Finkelstein, who was brilliant, who was one of Reagan's pollsters, and he was from New York, and I started working for him in '82, got to go back and look at the old numbers. And before Reagan won the election, for every favorable he had an unfavorable. And what you like least about Reagan is he was too old, too conservative, and he was going to blow up the world. I'm like, that sounds familiar. So when I was sitting with President Trump in February 21, I said, you realize 63% of all these voters, the Republicans, want you to run again. And he was like, oh, really? I said, yes. And I said, you realize that when Biden fails, like Jimmy Carter failed, there'll be buyer's remorse. They want you to run again. And from that moment on, I think he was preparing to run again. And then in December of 22, after the midterms, Susie Wiles had me go down, myself, and I met with President Trump. And I said, you realize 90% of these voters that are voting for you don't like Joe Biden. And you need to focus, even though you're headed for a Republican primaries, there's going to be other Republicans running against you. You need to attack Joe Biden every day because he's failing like we said he was fail. And if you can beat Joe Biden, the Republicans will nominate you. If you're not beating Joe Biden, they'll look for somebody else. And that's what he did. And he started going to East Palestine, and he started getting out there with the voters again. And every day, and it was so easy, but you're looking at Joe Biden's unfavorable rating there. I mean, he is actually, when he surrendered Afghanistan and inflation kicked in, this guy became the worst president in the history of the United States, not to mention the corruption. Next slide. Kamala Harris, she was impeachment insurance until Joe Biden decided not to run. And then the media decided they'd like her, but she's a 50% negative. So Trump is more popular than Biden and Harris by a lot in spite of all the legacy media's attacks. Next slide. Chuck Schumer. We got to get rid of this guy. I mean, I can't believe it. This is nationwide. He is 25 favorable, 39 unfavorable. If he doesn't support Trump's nominees, if he doesn't support his policies on securing the border, on cutting taxes, on growing the economy, I mean, we got to hold him accountable. We got to make sure the Conservative Party needs to make sure he gets an opponent next time we beat him. Next slide. I'm going to show you a bunch of issue positions. Public opinion is on our side. After 4 years of Joe Biden, they are with us. And we need to stand on these issues, and this is among 1,000 people nationwide, and you'll see similar numbers in New York. Deporting migrants who have entered the country illegally. That's the phrase, favor or oppose. 66 of all Americans favor, only 27 oppose. Next slide. Deporting known criminal and terrorist migrants who have entered the country illegally, 86-8. And the Democrats are voting to support keeping these criminals here. Biden had, most of the criminals they're deporting right now, they knew where they were because Biden had warrants on them that they didn't go to get them and deport them. Rapists, sex offenders, murderers, drug dealers. I mean, just is unbelievable. But that 8% is where the Democrat Party is. Next slide. Making tax cuts permanent, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, otherwise taxes will go up to $2,500 a year for the average American. That's what happens if we don't get the Trump tax cuts made permanent. And our friend Larry Kudlow talks about one big, beautiful bill. This is what it's about. 70% of all Americans favor this, only 17 opposed. Next slide. Ending federal taxes on overtime paid for workers, 66-25. Two-thirds of Americans support this. Next slide. Ending federal tax on tips and gratuities for service workers. They favor this, 71-21. Next slide. Ending federal taxes on Social Security income for seniors. They support this, 82-11. Those polls were all taken in December. Next slide. And listening to Andrew talk about this previously, do you support or oppose Congress passing a federal law that prevents biological males from competing in women's and girls' sports? 67-23, two-thirds of Americans support this. And by the way, in the campaign, one of the ads they talked about, we had about this, Kamala Harris talked about how she supported transgender surgeries for voters, for prisoners, et cetera. I mean, the Democrats still don't get this. Bruce Blakeman, who'll talk later, he's, protecting women's sports in Nassau County. But this is an overwhelming issue. Next slide. And in the campaign, we got sports moms. They were asking me, I get reporters calling up, why is that ad helping you? I said, we're getting sports moms who are voting for us. They don't want their daughters in locker rooms with men, and they don't want their daughters getting beat up playing sports with men. So, which of the following said close your own personal opinion about regarding federal government efficiency? 25% say the government does a better job than people give it credit for. 64% say the federal government is too wasteful and inefficient. That's all Americans. Next slide. In your opinion, how much of the federal budget do you think is wasteful spending? When you add up the mean score, by the way, some people, 2% said more than 90%, but the mean score, 38%. This is perception. 38% of all voters in America think that 38% of the federal budget is waste. The next slide. Oh, this is looking way ahead. I don't know if I can handle this. But on the Democrat side, if they had a primary today among the Democrats, who would they vote for? And Kamala Harris is still there at 33%. We can only hope. Buttigieg 9, Gavin Newsom 7, AOC 6. That's, so we got a favorite son there, or a favorite daughter. So I don't see any of those being able to beat the Republicans. Next slide. J.D. Vance would get 27%. And Donald Trump Jr., 21%. Ron DeSantis, 8. So we'll see. It's a long time between now and then, but I'll let you all speculate on that. You'll have plenty of straw votes between now and then. Next slide. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you for making those numbers come true, and we appreciate the opportunity. Now we just got to seriously, we got to work to make sure that President Trump's policies get enacted. We won an election, but Biden has left this country in a mess, and we got to make sure we clean up the mess. Thank you.
All right.